I'm first generation American. I think ever since I could remember, I just wanted to make art. But my mother, she's from Guatemala and she's now been here for 60 plus years. Her mentality was, are you going to make a living being an artist? She just couldn't fathom or see that I would be able to survive. And so, being a good daughter, I was thinking, okay, well, how can I do this? How can I still be creative and be happy? I had this fascination with cars. I'm originally from Chicago. As a teenager, there used to be a lot of car shows. I remember just being intrigued by the design of cars. So I thought I wanted to do that. After finishing high school, I kind of took a couple of years at community college to sort of get my basics out, get some art classes, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to College for Creative Studies in Detroit. My focus was auto design. But then I realized it just wasn't my thing to keep drawing cars over and over and over and over. I would notice my roommate who was always doing something with fibers and textiles. And when I'm drawing my projects, I would look at her, I would find myself seething with jealousy, wishing that I was doing what she was doing. And so, I think by the end of the year, I realized, okay, I can't do auto. Then I tried product, and I actually was interested in it, in furniture design, but then by the end of the year, I switched over to fiber art. Really enjoyed it. But then I realized, well, you know what? If I'm going to do fiber arts, I want to go back to Chicago because I could go to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. They have a great fiber arts program. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. So that's what I did. And then I ended up being in the high-end furniture world for a few years. I worked for a company called Lee Weitzman Furniture. And very expensive, beautiful furniture. But I found myself fascinated with the textiles. He ended up opening a small store in the city that was like a lower priced furniture market. And so he decided, why don't you merchandise like a small textile line? I started looking at different companies and started bringing in different textiles for customers to choose from. And I just started falling in love with, oh, maybe I want to design textiles. I worked there for a couple of years and I'm like, I want to design textiles. That's when I decided to apply at RISD. They accepted me. I was happily shocked. But I came and I really struggled originally when I first got there because I had this more artistic mentality where I had a hard time thinking about repeats. And I don't know why it was such a struggle for me, but I just couldn't get it. And so my thread was, I remember when I was finishing off my school year, I was doing a lot of fiber artwork in multiples. And I'm like, well, let me think about it from that perspective. Once I did that, it started to become a little bit easier. Then I was able to, okay, I get it now. And I started to kind of move into the repeat world. And then I really ended up really passionate about it, particularly weaving. I really loved weaving. I loved working on the jacquard loom. I also loved silkscreen printing. And I remember I combined a lot of these things in my thesis work. Right after school, I ended up working at Cynthia Teledesign satellite office for Kravet Textiles, a jobber in the home textiles industry. So, I didn't do much designing there. I did more merchandising there. But I found that I really enjoyed it. I loved picking color palettes. I love telling that story. I love picking qualities. I love looking at different designs and understanding, okay, some needed to be tweaked and so forth, and seeing all these mills. I loved actually going to the mills and meeting a lot of local vendors, although there were less, because this was in 2000 and I think it was the end of 4 or the beginning of 5. I think when I started with Cynthia. I think so. So we were working with Craftex and Quaker and American Silks and Valdez, but also a lot of European vendors.
Are they still in
and
business?
Indian vendors. The American vendors are not. So I think only Valdez is the one that's still in business. I think Regal Fabrics is also still in business. But all of the other ones, especially Quaker, which for our mid-range line, we used Quaker a lot. I think Sunbury is gone as well. And then I think at the time they were already starting to deplete when I was there toward the final years. But I got to go to Decasit and visit a lot of European vendors. High Point, after the crash, after the bubble burst in the economy and a lot of people lost their homes, I was actually one of the people that lost their home. I also lost my job. It really hit me. And I remember thinking, what am I going to do now? I guess I could go to New York and figure out something there. But you know what I ended up doing is I ended up teaching art. So I ended up working at AS 220 and teaching art to at-risk youth. During that process, I was thinking, how can I make myself more valuable? I just felt like, how can I even keep a job in this industry? So I decided to go to business school. I went to sort of it's an art college, mind you. I went to California College of Arts, and they had this interesting MBA program in design strategy, which was more geared towards entrepreneurship and innovation. And my passion was also sustainability. So I focused on that for a couple of years, but then while I was there, I met a wonderful woman by the name of Linda Gross, who's very well known in the fashion industry. She's a very passionate person about sustainability, and she's pushed a lot of projects through and been a mentor to many. And she was actually faculty there at the time. She ended up being my mentor, and I ended up helping her on various projects. So I remember I ended up working on the Sustainable Cotton Project. What they did is they created sustainable cotton, which is sort of a transitional type of cotton. It's in the middle. Now you can relate it to, if you know BCI, Better Cotton Initiative. And so basically they removed all the most toxic pesticides, and they started growing cotton that way. I was consulting with them. I worked on them with a school project. After I graduated, I worked for a project that she was helping another woman by the name of Kate Fletcher, who's also pretty well known in the fashion industry for sustainability. She is out of the UK. She had this wonderful project called Local Wisdom, the Craft of Use. And what that was about is, why do people keep things? Why do you keep an old sweater? Why do you keep an old dress? Why do you keep a vest? Why do you keep mending it? She did this through 7 different schools across the world. And one of the schools was California College of the Arts, which is where I was. So I was the project manager for the Local Wisdom project there. So what we did is we set up a little community center where people come in. It would be advertised, please bring in things that you've kept for years and tell us your story of why you've kept them. And so we had all these beautiful stories of like mothers and daughters passing on this dress, or people keeping and repatching vests, or they were just lovely, lovely stories. She would post these on her website, and then what the students would do then would visit the site and look at the different stories. They would create something from that. Yeah, and the ending project was an art show in the UK with their projects. I was there for a few years. I just felt like it was time to come home because California is very expensive. And so I realized, okay, what can I do now? I need to move to my next role. I started looking at different companies, and I thought I would end up in New York, but what happened is I thought I would be in home textiles again. And I got close, but I ended up going to work for a shoe company of all places, and that's where I ended up at Converse. And so that was really interesting because, you know, so most of my career, much of the work I've done was material development. Basically, I'm a troubleshooter. At Converse, that's what it was all about, troubleshooting materials on footwear. It was an interesting role because you're working with my fellow creatives, and they just want to make beautiful materials. We'd have to work together to sort of, you know, correct the construction, work with the vendors, and most of the vendors were in Asia, honestly. We were in Vietnam, in China, in South Korea, mainly. And so I had been to all the different mills in China and in Vietnam and at the different shoe factories. So I got to see how the shoes were made. I was able to go to a lot of different mills and see how the materials were made. And also, one of the important things that we had started to initiate was fair working practices. My main focus ended up really was material development, problem solving, but also integrating sustainability into the product line. I felt like I was finally, if I wasn't creating art, I was doing something that was very motivating to me. But I felt like every step of the way I've had to keep reinventing myself. And I thought at some point I'll end up back in textiles, in home textiles. So when I left Converse, I wanted to go back into home textiles. So I went to work for a rug company. I think the transition was hard because the two company cultures were really different. So in the end, that's when I left that company and kind of started doing my own thing. But I've sort of been like, am I going to go back into textiles, and how? There really isn't much here. I'd have to either move to New York or I'd have to go back to California. In the meantime, what I've been working on is going back into art little by little. In fact, this project is really kind of launching me to go back into art because I've had this piece that I started when I was doing my first year at RISD in the master's program. And it was my initial piece. It was collages, and it was about what's in the air. And I remember working on that piece, and I just absolutely loved it. You know, I had cut out thousands of pieces of magazines and pasted them together, and then I remember thinking, now what? And it was just a beginning piece that's like, what's happening around me? So it led to my thesis work. But of course, I've always thought about this piece. I just feel like it's where I started. And here I am back again. I've done all these things. What's my next step? So I'm sort of at the same point. And it's really interesting that I'm kind of bringing back this piece in and reworking it. I feel like, although I'm not sure that I'll end up back in the textile industry again, my interest is really now morphed into more sustainable design, and how can I help other designers or businesses streamline that and make better products for the environment. That's where I'm at now. I'm teaching and I'm working on my own business in sustainability.